Okay, hello. My name is Zachary. I'm representing the team made up of Zachary, Toy, Reed, and Joseph. Our project was on society and its interactions and effects on the environment, and more specifically how short-sighted environmental policies are going to affect us long term. So here we go. First, we'll talk about water pollution. We're talking about chemicals, trash, waste, things that are being dumped into the ocean, or just making their way there, well, not naturally, but preternaturally. It directly affects all living organisms. We're talking, um, there was a very viral video of a Texas A&M student who was pulling the straw out of a nose of a sea turtle. Like it was heartbreaking. And there are several more instances of that sort of thing. Basically, specifically plastics and things that don't biodegrade well, being dumped into the ocean, and that messes with our one of our main food supplies, and seafood and things like that. It poisons marine life. When we poison marine life, we can catch less fish throughout the year. There's a thing called maximum sustainable yield that is essentially the threshold of which you can capture fish and still expect that species to reproduce and maintain itself. Poisoning marine life, adversely affects that net catch that you can bring in. The U.S. specifically dumps about 1.2 trillion gallons of sewage into waters every year, and that's fresh waters, that's ocean waters, that's realistically just about everywhere we consider to be a body of water. And like I was talking about, some of those plastics take over 400 years to decompose, and it's a major issue because we can't look at that in a short. Uh, we can't look at that data over a short time frame. It has to be taken over the long haul. Land pollution, we're talking about destruction and contamination of land, so deforestation is a big deal. There are there are several countries in the Philippines, or no, sorry, not the Philippines, but Polynesia that um, are burning whole swaths of land because of an oil that we use in most of American processed foods. It's used in colorings. It's used in a lot of stuff, and it's very highly priced and valued, specifically by Western cultures. So you're seeing a lot of rainforests just getting burned down and replaced with these groves of oil trees, essentially, or oil producing trees. Um, we're talking about agrochemicals, so this is like agricultural chemicals, pesticides, that kind of stuff. Um, these affect all of the organisms involved in the land food chain, mostly because there's no way to avoid that. And then we have a huge issue in this country about, in general, of just not recycling. Like, we could realistically reuse approximately 80% of landfill items again, and we just don't because it's too much time or effort. Air pollution, we're talking indoor, outdoor, we're talking smoking, chemical burning, asbestos, burning fossil fuels. We're releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. That is the biggest human controlled contributor to greenhouse effects. The largest overall is water vapor, oddly enough, but we don't control that as half as much as we do CO2. Another big issue is methane. The U.S. uses about, if I recall correctly, 60% of its arable farmland for beef production. 30% of the remaining land use is used for feed for that livestock. So we produce cows produce a lot of methane when they burp and when they fart. And when you essentially use most of our farmland as burp and fart machines, you're gonna pump a lot more methane into the atmosphere. It can obviously cause diseases, lung risks, most notably though greenhouse gases, an increase in greenhouse gases. Climate change. This is the increase in worldwide surface temperatures over a long period of time. And we're not talking about 5 years, 10 years. We're talking 20, 30, 40 years. Um, we are literally seeing north and south ice caps are melting. The continuous rise of the sea level is happening. And it's estimated that the ocean could rise approximately 4 feet over the next 100 years. For reference, that will put a large section of Florida underwater. It will flood Galveston. It will destroy New Orleans. Like, this is something we need to handle and handle quickly so that we can, um, if not outright reverse these dramatic effects happening later on down the road, just at least mitigate them somehow. Okay, so you hear a lot about polar ice caps melting. It's really hard to envision that because not everybody gets to go, and by not everybody I mean most of the planet does not get to go to these ice caps and see this happen firsthand, because it's something that has to be measured basically from orbit and over a long period of time. So the greenhouse effect is what I was talking about earlier. This is CO2, water vapor, uh, greenhouse gases that keep uh, keep the Earth warm, and what's responsible for essentially our existence. The greenhouse effect is not bad in and of itself. The issue comes when we are throwing so much crap into the air, into the atmosphere specifically, that we are unable to. The effect intensifies essentially, and we're looking at the average temperatures have increased to almost 2 degrees over the last 40, 50 years, and that's a significant issue. Um, just 2 degree shift in global temperatures means that the cradle for hurricanes expands. Hurricanes have a certain minimum threshold of water heat they require for formation, and if the entire planet's getting warmer, that's that's more living space for hurricanes to start brewing. And global warming is essentially this is what we're talking about when we talk about global warming. We're talking not about just the Earth getting a little hotter. We're talking about the conditions required for natural disasters become easier to have. It's a huge issue. So we're talking about realistically the increase or decrease in precipitation in certain areas. Most coastal communities will experience an increase in precipitation and water levels, and drier climates will deal with decreased precipitation, meaning that those areas might just not become might not be habitable at all, which is kind of a concern. We have a lot of arid deserts in the U.S., particularly in the Southwest. And if we're not getting enough rain there, we won't realistically be able to continue surviving there. So from a functionalist perspective, you can look at the increase in population will also increase pollution. This isn't necessarily true, assuming that you can get the entire population to switch to better practices. Decrease in fossil fuels, businesses might cause dysfunction around the world. So basically, this is the idea that we are so deep into the fossil fuel industry that it's too big to fail is the idea. There are too many jobs tied up in it. There's too much money tied up into it, and change is scary. People don't like change. There was a huge issue when we switched from steam power to, nuclear and other fusion and fission uh, types of energy, and like an entire industry died, and people got terrified because change is scary. Uh, so wealthy people are less affected by this just by nature of being wealthy. You have access to new products, new technologies. We're talking electric cars, solar panels on the roof and stuff like that to basically fuel those vehicles, which is a very, very real thing. So functionalists also basically ascribe to capitalism. We're talking people buying more and more products. We waste a lot, particularly in the US, so you see products going to the waste dumps and landfills that have never been used or, would theoretically be used by other people. Minority groups and neighborhoods experience this more often because those neighborhoods are the ones where these landfills and like waste management plants are sent, like sorry, are based. Mostly because of a lot of racist urban planning practices that happened in the 20s and forward. That's been our presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it and maybe learned a little something. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you for your time. Bye.